marriage of the century. In honor of Black History, the White House is paying tribute to the descendants of Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington, two of our nation's most influential figures in the fight for freedom, justice, and equality. The legacies challenge us and they remind us the power of resilience and the importance of self-reliance as well. And I want to talk about these values. Reverend Sharpton, thank you for joining me on today because you are a modern day champion of many of these values. And I want to explore where we kind of go from here.
I think that it's very admirable that the White House honored some of the descendants and honored some of the major figures in our history. And I think that what we must do, though, is make sure that as we praise them, honor them, that we see ourselves as a continuation of their work. So, for example, when I have a quote bad day, I think of how bad it was for those that were on the front line of civil rights 100 years ago. And I almost feel like chastising myself for saying, how dare you have a bad day? So when I think that one of the great advantages of stopping looking at history is that you remind yourself that we have more to work with now than those that came before us. And what would they expect of us? I remember the story was told by when I was, growing up and just got into activism at 12 and 13 years old, that Dr. King had gotten very despondent, and there was people that were saying nonviolence had run its course. They were attacking him. And they said that Dr. King told in a staff meeting that he was ready to give up and ready to just say, look, I'll go to do a sabbatical. Y'all got it. He said, but then he thought about when he would pass, what could he say when he got to heaven to Frederick Douglass or Harriet Tubman? How would he tell them he gave up? And I thought, and they told me this when I was 12 or 13, and I thought about that. What do we say to all of the people we honor in Black history if we can't handle what's going on in our era? If they fought lynchings, hangings, driven into the mud and killed in Mississippi, we can't handle Donald Trump and Speaker Johnson? I mean, really? I think that's how we need to think during Black history.
But you don't know, Rev, until you actually become a student of history.
Right.
Frederick Douglass famously urged to agitate as a means to combat injustice and promote equality. In today's landscape, what do you see as the most urgent need for agitation, and how can we apply his action to that fight?
The urgency is on several levels. One, it starts with protecting our right to vote. And secondly, protecting our economic interests from unemployment all the way to supporting Black businesses. And I think that the area of agitating in those areas is extremely important now when you have this Supreme Court that has changed the span or the level of voting rights protections, taking out Section 2, and the same Supreme Court taking out affirmative action, which has led also to the war on DEI, which limits our economic options, because DEI made the inclusion in terms of everything from employment to business contracts. Those two alone give you enough to agitate on. And I think that a lot of us are sprinters, but not long distance runners, that we get mad for a minute. I mean, I was telling people when we saw the great surge behind George Floyd, and I was telling a lot of young people in National Action Network, don't get intoxicated by the surge, because let's see where they are a year from now. Because I've seen surges all of my journey. Trayvon Martin, there
Yeah.
was a surge. Michael Brown was a surge. 20 years before that was Howard Beach. And every time we hear the people chant, I ain't gonna take no more. Well, you're gonna take a lot more till we change the laws and till we change the culture. So if you get in this feeling that this is it, then you are having the wrong attitude. So this is part of it until we change this stuff permanently.
When we look at in the spirit of Douglas and his willingness to challenge even his allies, even President Lincoln at the time on issues of emancipation and equality, how do you believe today's leaders should engage in the pushback, even when I think sometimes we get happy just having a seat at the table, but if you are not able to push back and challenge even those who you may in some instances be on the side of, I think that you are in essence kind of pouring water on the movement and what you're trying to do. So when we talk about the pushback and challenges, what areas do you think that we need to also begin to challenge in?
We have to push back as strongly and passionately as we can in the areas of the attorney general on his voting rights and the courts and the president. And we've got to push back on economic opportunities, but we also have to push back on criminal justice. We still have a long way to go in terms of police reform and on criminal justice reform, period, access to guns. And one of the things I think that we've not put a lot of focus on that we're going to deal with at our National Action Network convention in April is we have not put a lot of emphasis on how we deal with the reorganizing of media and what the media entities, the government regulators allow. Because as we've seen media expand, when I started as a youngster, it was, television, radio, and then it started going into FM radio, then it started going slowly into social media. As we had began to expand Black radio ownership, Black being getting on television, both cable and regular and all, as the media expanded into internet, into social media, Black's footprint shrunk. And now we're dominated by people that have not that have used bigger platforms against our interests. So you got a guy like Elon Musk who owns now what was Twitter and owns other bodies that use that ownership to not only express views that I may disagree with, but lessens the views of others. And just like we put pressure on the networks and radio in the past and got on the government regulators on licensing people that exclude us, we need to do that with those that are now in the larger media because most people don't understand what's going on because where they get their information is
Yes.
biased.
Yeah.
So if you've got young people saying, well, I don't understand what's going on, I like Trump or whatever, if they're not watching MSNBC, but they're watching TikTok, that's got to be something that we've got to make sure is fair. I'm not saying they got to agree with us, but where's the Black presence in TikTok at the top? Where's the Black presence in X? Where's the Black presence in Facebook and all of that? If these people are regulated, because all of them have to go through regulators of government. Government must make sure they're inclusive. Otherwise, we're back where we started in the 50s.
I talked with several of the civil rights leaders. It's great that you mentioned that. And one of the biggest things that they believe that we are going to face is disinformation, especially with the huge emergence and fast growing pace of AI. And so we have to begin to seek out Black voices and control our own narrative. Uh,
No
there
doubt
was
about it. I think that AI is a real threat. And I think that the more we have our young people hooked on technology, they won't know with AI the difference between what's real and what's not.
we've seen that already. The commercial that Republicans tried to push that was totally deep fake, having a picture that they had put together of an ad of blacks going into Black communities with Make America Great Again hats on. And if you didn't pay close attention, you would have seen the sixth and the seventh finger coming out of the character, and someone had to call out and was like, "No, that's not real." But you just on this face value, you have to now look that closely because
That's right.
what you may see in front of you may not be real.
That's right.
Just a couple more questions. Cast down your bucket where you are. It is at the bottom of life that we must begin and not at the top. That's a quote from Booker T. Washington, his famous Atlanta Exposition speech in 1895, encouraging African Americans to utilize the resources at their immediate disposal. And he really pushed and advocated for self reliance and hard work. When we look at Douglas saying agitate, and we look at Booker T emphasizing self reliance. What do you see the path forward in taking those two messages? Some people try to make them like they're dueling messages, but when we even look at the civil rights movement, there were many messages, but the goal was the same.
I think that you coined it right. The goal was the same. So when I was growing up in the late 60s, 70s, you had Dr. King, who had just been killed, and you had Elijah Muhammad. One was saying that we should have the right to vote, we should have the right to public accommodations. Other was saying we ought to build our self-sufficiency. He was building businesses all over the country. And you would have these debates. When I was in junior high school and high school, it was debatable. And I was born, raised in New York, in Brooklyn to be specific. So unlike a lot of several civil rights leaders, I was not born in the South. So in New York, Malcolm X was the idol in New York more than Martin Luther King. So I was out of sync with King. But as time went on, they ended up intersecting, wanting the same thing, because you can't build businesses without a zoning board allowing you to build businesses, which means you need to be able to vote to do that. The more we matured in trying to deal with the evils of America, the more we understood that we may have different tactics, but we need each other because we're facing the same problem. So it got to where when people needed businesses, they would call somebody like me because I could call the mayor or the city council, who we helped elect, saying, you got to give that corner to this business. One supports the other. So I think that where we had the debates with Booker T all the way to the debates with Malcolm and Martin, it was a process of, we had just come out of slavery less than 100 years later. We had to figure it out as we went. All whites don't use the same tactics. So why would we, we're not stupid. We don't have one-sided intellect. Of course, we're gonna have different tactics and different views. But if we're after the same thing, we can disagree without being disagreeable.
Lastly, Reverend, you started NAN in 1991. Sometimes I always wonder what made you start an organization as opposed to going and heading up one of the existing at the time civil rights organizations. But your work has been at the forefront of advocating and equality. I just want people to know about some of the key accomplishments and progress that the organization has made in speaking truth to power and the need of and pushing the needle forward when it comes to civil rights issues.
Well, when I was growing up, I'll give you an example. When I was 9, they had the March on Washington. And you had what they called the Big Six. Dr. King, James Farmer of CORE, Roy Wilkins of NAACP, Whitney Young of Urban League, and A. Philip Randolph was Labor, John Lewis from Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. There were 6 leaders at one time. Then you had Malcolm on the outside that was not with the march. You had Adam Clayton Powell in Congress. You had Thurgood Marshall, Solicitor General on his way to the Supreme Court. So when I looked at the array of different lanes, when I became known as an activist in New York, I said in the church-based moral direct action lane that will go to jail, that will raise issues, there's no organized national group that is taking that lane. I want to build that, and I'll work with those that comes from the economic, like Urban League, like Mark Morial does, and NAACP does. So I think that we all need to understand that we need all these lanes. And what we've done with the National Action Network and the other organizations, what we call the 8 legacy groups, is we work together in everything from DEI all the way back to Trayvon Martin or whatever. And we say we don't have accidents as long as you put on a turning light before you change lanes. You stay in your lane. Now, what we've done in our lane is be able to change the perception in America that these things were just isolated incidents. So we'll go in and organize the marches and do the funerals and say, this is what happened in with Amadou Diallo in the 90s. This is what happened with Abner Lawima. And then the other groups were saying this is the policy around it. And if we've got to go to jail, if we've got to do the funeral, whatever it is, we use it to highlight the issue. And that's why I probably became more known than others, because that was my job. Others don't need to do that. And I think that out of that, we were able to put racial profiling laws on the books. We were able to stop and frisk in many urban cities, including New York. We were able to add in terms of business contracts where people, elected controller had to say they were going to put certain contracts aside. So we've been able, in the lineage of those that came in the 60s and 70s and 80s, to change laws and policies. Because at the end of the day, it's not how much media you get. Did you change anything? We take for granted today that we have a black woman vice president. That wasn't even imaginable when I got started. We take for granted we elected a black president and reelected. I remember in 72 when I was 18, I was the youth director for Shirley Chisholm's presidential campaign. People said we ain't never gonna have a black president. So I think that our successes has made us take things for granted, which is why I'm reminding people we didn't get here because we were lucky. We are here because we did the work, and those that are in those positions need to be reminded of that. We didn't put them there for their resume. We put them there to do the work.
Do the work, and that you have done. Thank you so much, Rev, just for talking with us and going through that, the legacy, the history, and how we must move forward, sir. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Ebony. Always good to be with you.
Absolutely.